Hello everyone and welcome back to Nate the Hoof Guy. Today's video we have got a redhead in the chute and she's crossing her front legs. In the world of cows, that usually means we've got dual sole ulcers on these front feet. Let's get started on this right one and see what we got. When it comes to sole ulcers on front feet, they're almost always going to be on the medial, and that's the same case as we got going on here. We're going to have to remove this overgrowth here, and underneath, we'll uncover that thing. Swing in here, you can see where that ulceration is in that typical sole ulcer site. So we've got some loose horn here and double sole. We're going to remove that to expose that lesion. One of the theories behind ulcer formation is that an individual claw becomes overburdened, becomes out of balance, and get too much weight focused on that particular claw. And that's what then will form ulcer. What we see here would tend to make that seem true, right? We had a lot of buildup on that claw compared to that lateral claw. But the one problem with that is that that's not a typical growth pattern for a cow's foot. What usually happens on a normal foot is that the toe becomes elongated. Most of the pressure and wear is focused toward the heel of the foot. So when we trim a cow, a normal cow that doesn't have any problems, we tend to remove very little toward the heel and most of it toward the toe section. That's the complete opposite of what we see when we have an ulcer situation. We end up with a lot of growth at the heel and not much toward the toe. And so what I think actually happens is sometimes we mistake what a symptom, which is this thickening of the heel, as the cause of an ulcer, but in actuality it's just that, it's a symptom. We get trauma inside that foot that causes her to, number one, put less weight on the heel of her foot, where the ulcer is, focus more toward the toe, which is why we have more wear of the toe, and less wear of the heel, which is why that sole begins to thicken, as well as we know that horn production increases as a result of trauma. So we have both of those things combined cause that appearance of extra horn at that heel site. So but we look at it and say, well, obviously there's overgrowth here, there's an ulcer underneath, that overgrowth must have caused that ulcer. Anyway, so regardless, what we need to do here is remove all of this loose horn from around that lesion that's there to get it to heal. And once we get that taken care of, that ulceration, now we get these angles correct in that foot again, that should remove these pressures in that are causing that ulcer, and that should heal up nicely as long as we can get that loose horn away and get a block on that other claw to give it some rest. As we swing in here, you can get a look at what's left of that lesion. She's almost actually got this healed on her own, but not complete yet. So I'm going to put a block on this other claw just to give that some relief and let that finish up healing. Another thing to think about when it comes to that theory we were talking about earlier about ulcer formation is how we actually treat a foot to heal an ulcer. We actually take all of the weight we can and isolate it on the other claw to get that claw to heal. That in itself, that theory, or that therapeutic approach to healing a lesion should tell us that it won't necessarily cause an ulcer, because we do that all the time to heal ulcers. Because these cows spend almost all their time on pasture, dermatitis is really not a concern on this farm, so I'm just going to give this foot a quick spray and I'm going to put it down without a wrap. As I said at the beginning of this video, she was crossing her legs, so we need to take a look at this other foot and see if there's an ulcer in that one as well. Another interesting point about ulcers is that over the course of the last year or so on this channel, I've had 3 or 4 different instances of double sole ulcers on front feet. And oddly enough, every single one of those came from pasture cows. Not a single one was on a freestall farm, and so that leads me to believe that there's more to the story of ulcer formation than just hard surfaces and things like that. I think there's a lot more involved as far as what causes these things to form in the first place that we really don't have all figured out. I think what we'll find over time is that there's some type of metabolic trigger that if we give this foot certain circumstances that will allow this ulcer to form. What do I mean by that? Let's say we have this metabolic trigger, we have poor foot angle, that's going to make the likelihood of an ulcer to form. Or if we have this metabolic trigger associated around calving time, that'll allow that peel wound to sink and create situations where there's just too many variables that all come into play that ultimately put this foot in a position where they ulcer. And other times, when that situation's not there, these feet don't ulcer, even with poor foot angle, or even around situations where they're uncomfortable. So, like I said, it's a complex issue, and I think there's a lot more to it that we just really need to learn over time. You've seen in some of my other videos some of these ulcers that are more like protrusions on the bottom of the foot. This is more of a flat one, and as you'll see as I remove some of this loose hoof, it doesn't have a lot of protrusion to it. It'll ultimately almost look like an abrasion in that sole rather than an ulcer forcing through. And I think that's another one of these distinctions we see with different types of ulcerations and different mechanisms that cause them. So just like that first foot, I'm going to get a rubber block on here to relieve pressure from that injured claw. And in this case, I am going to wrap this foot. I'm not going to use salicylic acid though, just like I explained in the first foot. The risk of dermatitis here is really low, so I'm not going to use salicylic acid on it. I'm going to use the wrap just to keep debris off of this fresh lesion for a couple of hours. That's really all it's this wrap comes off right away. It doesn't stay on for days. It's just so we don't get stuff caught in that newly healed lesion. All right, let's let her out and see how she walks on her new kicks. As always, guys, thanks for watching. We will see you all on